bang into the
I
door.
love it.
I locked the
Okay,
door.
good.
Yeah.
Okay. I love it. I love. Okay, you'll hear kiddos in the background.
Oh yeah, no, feel free. They can join if you want folks to come
Uh,
in and join. You can have them do that.
okay, you
Yeah, no,
sure?
I had yeah. This is family. I want this to be
Okay.
family. People
All right.
watching. Yeah,
Okay, let me just open the door for a sec.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. All right.
Love it.
Okay.
Well, we're gonna get a few folks to join in. I'll do our little. I have a little intro
Okay.
uh, video. We're live now, so folks will be chiming in. The other great thing is I think you'll be able to see their comments on the right hand
Oh,
side. So
yeah,
there's a
in the
comment.
live comments.
Yep.
Yeah.
So when they leave comments, I can put them onto the screen. So folks
Okay.
that are watching, if you have questions or comments, or you just want to show love on this Juneteenth, like just let folks know. I'll put it on the screen and we can engage with folks. Um, so let me just play our intro video really quick and then we'll get back. Awesome. Well, welcome everyone to the Praxis Podcast. This is a special series, a special day. It is Juneteenth, the celebration of the emancipation of Black folks from slavery, and we'll have a quick discussion of the history of that, what that means, and why it's such a powerful day. And if you don't know about it, there's a lot of resources out there that I'd recommend you check out. But we have the immense honor. I have the privilege of talking with, in community, sharing space with Dr. Uché Blackstock. If you haven't met Dr. Blackstock, truly a powerhouse. And I don't mean in the way that Black women have to be exceptional all the time just to be normal, but the fact is that your presence alone, I think, changes people. It moves people in ways that I just admire, and I just sit back and I watch from the videos you do to the tweeting. I'll put your Twitter handle up soon, but if you don't follow Dr. Uché Blackstock and her sister, then you're missing out. So make sure you do that. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Edwin.
Yeah, and you may have the kiddos joining us too. They'll be running in and out.
And they have boundless energy. So yeah, let's see.
Yes,
Let's see how that goes.
we got
One,
Sherman
one
Long.
actually. Oh, hi, yeah, hi, Sherman. I think you emailed me today, maybe. So I know I owe you an email.
No,
Okay.
no, don't forget. I mean, we have so many emails in our inbox. It is wild. So if y'all can just give folks grace, know that folks will get back to you. Yeah, but you're gonna say that they are gonna run in, or they already ran
They,
in.
they, they may run in, and I had an interview on MSNBC a few weeks ago, and the little one ran in,
Yes.
and I kind of froze. But next time I'm gonna hug him and kiss him. But
Yeah.
I think he realized that what was going on, and then he ran back out. But it was
No,
the first time.
I I remember. I think I was watching it, or I watched again on social media, and the face that you had, it was shock. It was, don't throw the camera down, don't mess up the audio. We're almost done with the interview. But I think it's love. I think folks should have grace in this time.
Yeah,
We're in our
absolutely.
homes, thankfully, and the kids are going to run in and out. So
Yeah.
do not. This is a very different interview. This is family. This is community. So they're all welcome. If you want to eat, you can eat. I think
I'll drink some water.
drink some water. Yeah, it's hot. I'm sure it's hot out there because
Mhm.
it is
Mhm.
72 in Seattle, Washington,
Oh,
which
I
is
think it's almost 80 here. I'm in Brooklyn, so yeah.
okay. Yep. So for folks out there, just staying cool. We have about 30 folks watching. Again, if you're watching, you can leave a comment. We'll put it on the screen and we'll engage with you. But for folks who don't know you, which may be a rare group of people, I'm wondering if you can just tell us a bit about your journey, things that you think you'd like to share with folks on what it means to be Dr. Uché Blackstock, or maybe even growing up with your twin sister. Like
Yeah.
you've shared a bit on social media, but feel free to share as much as you'd like.
Sure. So I can't talk about my upbringing without talking about my mother, who was the original Dr. Blackstock. And I think all of the work that my sister and I do on behalf of our communities are really a tribute to her legacy. Her name was Dale Blackstock. She was an amazing woman, born in Brooklyn, New York, not far from where I live right now, to a single mother, 5 siblings, raised on public assistance, had a really rough childhood, and was the first person in her family to go to college, and had a chemistry professor there who said, you know what, I see something in you, and I really want to encourage you to apply to medical school. And it was something she had never thought about before. And so she applied to medical school, and she got into all of her medical schools, and she ended up matriculating at Harvard Medical School. And it was rough for her. She was in class with students whose parents were Nobel Prize winners, students whose parents had written the textbooks that they were using in class. And so it was definitely a culture shock for her. She graduated, she came back to New York City, completed her residency at Harlem Hospital, and then became triple boarded internal medicine, geriatrics, and nephrology, and actually came back to our community at Kings County SUNY Downstate Hospital Center in Brooklyn, where she practiced for many, many years. Unfortunately, we lost her to leukemia when we were, Oni and I were sophomores in college, but she knew that we were pre-med, and we had 19 really wonderful years with our mom. Like, we always say that when they meet us, they're meeting our mother's light, and they're meeting her. She was a really wonderful, wonderful person. But also what we learned from her is that, the work that we do, that we do for our communities, and both Oni and I are very purpose-driven individuals. And so we both went into medicine. Obviously, we're actually the first Black mother-daughter legacy from Harvard Medical School. And again, that's not any credit to me or to Oni. That's a credit to our mother's hard work and having the grit, but also having, of course, there's luck in there, because there were all these structural barriers that she had to overcome to succeed, which shouldn't have been the case. So anyway, we also were pre-med, went to medical school, and I ended up training in emergency medicine. I came back to Brooklyn, and I trained at SUNY Downstate Kings County, where my mother had once worked. And I was able to have the honor of caring for predominantly Caribbean American community in central Brooklyn, in Flatbush, Brooklyn, and had really learned to be a physician at Kings County. And then I was for about almost 10 years at NYU School of Medicine, where I was faculty. And it was interesting because I think for a long time, I thought I would stay in academics. I thought I would have my entire career in academics, and things were actually going okay, or so I thought. I mean, obviously they weren't okay, because I was probably for a good number of years the only Black faculty in my department, and there were no Latino faculty. So obviously I knew there was a problem. But then I was asked if I wanted to assume a diversity leadership role in the institution. And that's really where I saw that, these institutions that are embedded in tradition, and thus racism, are often inhospitable places for not only Black faculty, but also trainees and other people of color in the institutions. And so I made the tough decision to leave academic medicine and focus on my company, Advancing Health Equity.
Yeah. And I think people have read the piece that you wrote, why Black folks are leaving academic medicine. And I mean, it's such a deep, thorough, I mean, if there was any questions as to why, I think they were answered. And if there are institutions that are wondering, why don't we have Black women? Why don't we have Black folks in our academy? They need to read this piece, because you laid it out.
Well, what's interesting is that I guess this was to be expected, but my institution, the way they perceived it was, this is like an individual problem. Like, this is an Uché problem, because I think that is probably the easiest way out, right? To say, yeah, it's just this, this one person had an issue here, as opposed to say that we actually have like systemic problems within this institution in terms of recruiting and retaining and promoting Black faculty.
Right. Right. So what was that transition like? I mean, was there, I can't imagine, but it's like you're stepping into a new space and you say, well, I'm going to let this go and I'm
I
doing something
know.
that I'm trying new. I mean, what was that?
You know what? I think because the decision, I processed it probably for over like a period of 6 months. So I had a lot of time to think about it. So when I took the leap, it wasn't so scary.
Okay.
But and I talked to a lot of people, trusted friends, family members who were incredibly supportive. But yeah, no, I still admit it was a little scary. But I also feel like when there's this quote about like when you walk in your purpose, you find your destiny. And so I knew everything would work out, right? And I knew that this organization that I wanted to create to address some of the workforce diversity issues that I saw in academic medical institutions, but also to work with healthcare organizations around, addressing their role in perpetuating disparities. I knew that was work from the heart, so I knew it would work out in my heart.
Yeah, and it did. It didn't just work out in
Yeah.
your heart. It's working.
No, yeah, it's interesting. It's working. But it's also it's labor of love.
Yeah.
But it's also painful work too, because this is out of suffering of our communities, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I tell folks, I wish we didn't have to do this work.
Right.
Right. Like there shouldn't be a reason that there is a business or program focused on health inequities, because that means there weren't, they're not there. But the truth is they're there. They have been there. They're going to continue to be there.
Right.
What have you found to be the most challenging part of doing this work?
Actually, I think it's the emotional labor of it.
Yeah.
I have to say, I do a lot of talks and trainings and even the consulting work I do. When I'm done, I feel exhausted. Like I have to take a few days off.
Yeah, I think folks
Yeah.
don't fully grasp that. Like it's actually deep in the gut. Like I will leave a talk, and please share if you feel the same. And I'm like, why am I so tired? I feel like I did a 12-round boxing match with like folks who were just ready to pounce on every word that I had, and they didn't like the way I described the definition of racism, and they didn't like this, and oh well, that's my opinion. And I'm like, gosh. And I tell folks, I'm not going in tomorrow. I'm tired.
Right. Yeah. No, absolutely. What is this? There's this meme. I don't know if it's like you call out Black, like you call out of work, and it's because
Right,
you're
right,
Black.
yep,
It's because you're just
you're tired.
you're exhausted. And and I'm an emergency medicine physician. I was
Right.
used to working long shifts, and now I do part-time urgent care work because I just wanted to still keep my feet wet, right,
Yep.
in the clinical work. And so I do 12-hour shifts a week now, and it's doing the trainings is more exhausting than a 12-hour clinical shift,
Right.
because it really just takes a lot out of you. And then even like these conversations where, even if people aren't necessarily pushing back against what you're saying, but just having those deep conversations, it can be very draining.
Yeah. And I mean, we have a few folks agreeing. Shout out to Kansas. You got like medical school in Kansas, the dean of students on Twitter saying, yeah, it's tiring, soul tiring. And I don't know if at least, my white colleagues are slowly getting to understand what that means. But the truth is that they'll never actually know what it means, because for them, they say, well, this is what you do, Edwin. Like, well, I don't understand why it's tiring. Like you just get up and you talk about the things and that's it. And I'm like, yeah, but I feel like every time I get up, I'm going to war, and I don't want to feel that. I feel that I'd like to feel like I'm talking to Dr. Blackstock all the time, right? It's comfortable. We can laugh. It's joyous. We can challenge each other. We can learn. But there it's like, okay, before I walk into the room, I kind of straighten up and I'm like, take a few breaths. Here we go. And I'm not sure. Yeah, like at the end of it, I'm like, I may not have a job after this.
And it's like, for what? For speaking the truth, right?
Right.
And that's also the other draining part about it. You're like, I'm doing what is right. I'm saying what is true. But then I'm getting like gaslit and thinking that what I'm saying is too radical, it's too revolutionary, when no, you're just speaking the truth.
Right.
And actually I was in a situation at NYU where I started becoming very self-conscious about what I said, how I said it. And it was even, and I'll be totally transparent, like one of the reasons why I left, because there was actually a tweet that someone actually retweeted today, but a former dean of Harvard Medical School, he had posted something about how he was very upset that the portraits of these luminaries in medicine and surgery have been taken down. And I had replied to that, giving him like kind of like a history lesson. And it wasn't aggressive. It could have been aggressive. I could have gone there. I didn't, right? But someone saw that and forwarded it to my dean and administration. And given the culture at my previous institution, they were not happy with that. And so I just couldn't really be in an environment where I felt censored. And it's especially in speaking about race and racism, like there's no way.
Yeah, no, I feel that so much. I mean, I have colleagues who are supposedly there to be an allyship and support, and they've told people that I have a dangerous pedagogy. And I'm like, wow, those are strong words. And my response is that I guess telling the truth, as you mentioned, or seeking justice, it is dangerous. It's dangerous that we have to continue to do this work and constantly have the fear of retaliation.
Right.
Constantly have the fear of we may get blackballed. Oh, you made the wrong person feel uncomfortable.
Right.
And those are the risks we take every day in doing this work that I don't know many folks fully grasp, that
I know.
it is putting our profession on the line every time we walk in, because the only thing we can do is nothing but tell the truth.
Right.
And folks don't like it. I mean, I had a colleague in an evaluation, a white colleague, say that my presentation on racism and racialized medicine was an abomination to his medical education.
Yeah. And that's what we have to work with.
Right.
Like that's what we're working with.
Do you have recommendations for folks? Like what do you say? Yeah.
When you were talking about that, it reminded me of two things. One, it's like also what Black students and other students of color have to also deal with. Like they can't just go to school to learn, right? They can't be in medical school just to learn, or law school or whatever school. They are actually doing advocacy work too, right? Like they literally can't just focus on being a student, right? So I was just thinking about that, because I know that our students really were the ones that put the fire under our feet in terms of pushing us, because of course we have that concern about retaliation, right? But it's usually the students that are like, nah, you gotta do this.
Right, exactly. No, and I want to also give a shout out to the students, because it's the students that provide the energy for these these institutions to move, and always wanting them to know, like, we're here because of you, and we want to continue to be here in this position to advocate, to push, and that position also gets very tricky, because there are going to be some folks that say, well, I don't know what side you're on, Edwin. Right. Whose side are you on? And
I know.
My response is, why are we choosing sides? I didn't know this was a game of sides. I thought we're trying to educate the future physicians of the world. Yeah. But go ahead. I cut you off.
No. Oh, no. I was just thinking, I wholeheartedly agree. The other thing I was thinking about was when you were talking about your colleague who said that your work was an abomination to medical education, was that I feel like there are different ways that your colleagues respond. Like, I think I was also in some pain at the silence of some of my white colleagues who, there were some that actually could see what was going on and really didn't say anything. And it wasn't until I actually left NYU, people like months later, literally last week, people reached out to me. I think maybe because of everything that's going on in the country right now. But we really need our white colleagues to step up.
Yeah.
Because one thing that I wrote in that piece was that the responsibility is on us to fix a system that we did not create, right?
Right.
And it's such a heavy burden in every way, right?
In
and
every
so
way.
yeah, and so I mean, they need to step up.
Yep. And Dr. Bullock
yeah.
left a comment, I think, to your point of gaslighting, that the gaslighting and the censorship are real, and folks are manipulated into being silenced.
Yes.
And it's true, and I see it in folks. And honestly, it's almost like a feeling of, well, Edwin, maybe you need to tone it down because it makes me look bad.
Right.
And I'm like, wait, so now I'm responsible for everyone? Like, I don't understand how that works. I'm just here to do the work that it's in my job description. And in my job description, I made it very clear. My job description says to address the issues of institutional racism within medicine. And I did that because when my colleagues say the absurd things that they say, I get to say, this is my job. This is what you brought me here to do. And yeah, I think what we have to wrestle with on a constant basis is, how do we do it while maintaining a healing and a fullness, which is difficult? How do we not let our humanity get lost in this process?
Yes.
And how do we get a grounding that is outside of our work? Because for many folks, meaning my colleagues, like, work is their identity, and I'm like, that's not me. Like,
especially in medicine, right?
Right.
Especially in medicine.
Yeah. What thoughts do you have? I mean, what do you recommend as far as like, how do you get fulfilled? How do you get that energy to say, okay, I'm going to keep doing this tomorrow?
Well, I mean, I have a very, from my family, I have a very supportive family. My friends are very supportive. On the weekends, I really try not to do any work. And that was something that I had to learn the hard way, like to really protect my time. And even more so as I've gained more exposure, I even have this auto reply. People probably have seen it. Oh, you saw it probably. Yep. Like I'm basically like, I want to be honest. Look, there's a lot going on right now. I'm probably not going to email you back today. I need some time. And for me, that was more for me. That auto reply is less for the people that are emailing me, but more for me, because in terms of saying, hey, Uché, you have a buffer, you have some space.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. I love that. I think that's so important. I need to get to that point. I don't have a auto reply, and I probably should, but I have a good friend who has probably the best one, and I love it so much, that says, I only check my emails on Tuesdays and Thursdays. You will get a reply after I check them.
I love it.
Yep.
That's gangsta. I love it.
Right? I know.
I love it.
I know. And then another one that says, and if I don't reply to you in 3 days, then you should send another email.
Yeah, put the emotional labor, put the work on them.
Right.
Yes.
Right. And folks, but what we also wrestle with that folks don't fully grasp is, some people will say, oh, you're being unprofessional, Edwin. I expect you to respond to me. And I'm like, well, your expectation is not it's not in my job description.
Right.
I've given so much free labor to the goal of achieving justice and equity in a space that was never intended to do that. And I know you have as well. And I feel, honestly, like there needs to be an accounting. Let's account for all the hours that folks have not just provided free labor, but the number of jobs that we've saved because of what was going to happen if we didn't have conversations with folks.
Right.
Like the number of times the institutions were like, oh yeah, this seems like it worked. And it's like, yeah, not because y'all were doing it.
Yeah. And that's the other thing. Like our perspectives and the skills that we bring, not just from our education or professional training, but from our lived experiences, are invaluable to these institutions.
Yeah.
Like absolutely invaluable.
Right.
Literally, they should be like on their hands and knees. It's so funny because when I left NYU, one of my friends who had also left academics, she texted me and she said, Uché, these institutions don't deserve us. And I still feel that way. I still feel that way. The way that we're treated, the way that our labor is treated, the way that it's underappreciated and undervalued, and not just the faculty, the students, the trainees.
Right.
I mean, just even like what we have to go through, like just in a given day, and I'm not even talking about the microaggressions, right? It's just like the insults, the insults to our humanity on a daily basis.
Right.
But still we have to, we have deliverables, right? We have to get good grades, or we have to, get the work done.
Yep. On a regular, and that's needed for promotion, right? That's needed. Well, how do you fit this into your CV? And it's funny because yeah, go ahead.
No, go on. No, go on.
No, I was gonna say it's funny. I think some people listen to me and they're like, "Oh, you must have left academic medicine too, Edwin." And I'm like, "Well, I may not have a choice." I tell folks, I do this work knowing that any turn, this is the institution of medicine will say, "You know what? We've had enough."
Yeah.
Which I get. And I do this work with that risk on a regular basis. And some people, Edwin, why would you think that? Like, no, you're good. Like, everyone loves you. And I'm like, yeah, they love you until they don't. And
exactly. No, it's true. I don't know what it is that could change their minds. I'm actually interested in hearing from you, as someone without a medical background, with a JD background. How is it just sort of observing what it's like in the medical community? Like, because I think your observations must be incredibly invaluable and interesting.
It is fascinating to come into this space as an observer and saying, like, why does this seem so backwards?
Right.
Like, why are doctors both clinicians and then expected to be experts in things that they were never trained in? Why are physicians expected to do double labor just because they get paid a healthy amount, but they get paid a healthy amount to be physicians?
Right.
And then it's, but you can also teach, like, this is going to help your career. And I'm like, you look at the legal academy, the law professors are like, you are not going to make me do something that is not in my job description. Period.
But it also like almost undervalues the other work that they're doing.
Exactly.
Because there are people who actually have the training, right, to do that work.
Right. Who they won't tap on.
Right.
Which is sad. So I mean, it's part of the work in curriculum that I try, and even in trainee education and CME, but to the effect of, like, it's okay to not know everything, right? Like, you don't have to be both an amazing general surgeon and understand the theoretical frameworks of white supremacy.
Right.
Like, there's experts that do that. Mm-hmm. And we can call on them. And I say this because all of our colleagues, and you may experience this, they're like, well, Edwin, how am I supposed to know all of this? I'm going to, like, step into a landmine and I'm going to just say the wrong thing. And I'm like, well, you're a physician, right? Yes. When there's a case that you are uncertain about, you get a second opinion. Is that right? Yes. And I said, and if you're a family physician, you're not going to do a surgery on a fractured femur. No, I'm going to send that to surgery. And I said, exactly. Mm-hmm. So when issues of racism come up, why would you expect yourself to be the arbiter of deciding whether this is racist or not, or how to even fix it? Now, some people say, well, Edwin, they do need to do the work. Yeah, absolutely. Folks need to do a fundamental education of deconstructing whiteness, without a doubt.
Right.
But the contradiction of it is that, or the contention is, I also don't want people to rebuild the system who are the ones that created it in the harmful way in the first place.
Exactly.
So when they say we don't know what to do, in my mind, it's great. Well, this is what you need to do.
Right. That's why you're there. That's why the expert is there.
So that's one of the observations. The other observation is the inherent power of hierarchy that I am incredibly uncomfortable with.
Yeah. Right.
Everything from the wards, right? If you're a medical student, you are not speaking up when you're on
Right.
rounds.
I know. It's horrible. I know.
If to publishing in academic journals, oh, we need to discuss who's going to be first and last author. I wish I could just not care at all, but for promotion now, they ask, well, how many first authorships do you have? How many second authorships do you have? And what journal was it published in? Where I've been trying to advocate and say, you know what, how about we just create a model where we author as a team and we have a team name and everyone's listed in this team, and anyone, when they put it on their CV, can put that as their first authorship because everyone contributed to it.
Right.
But this institution would lose its mind.
I know. No, I actually had a a tweet that I think last year that I lost a lot of followers, but I don't care. But I think I said physicians are the white people of healthcare professions.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong, because
and some people got offended, but I was like, no, truly, and you know, I mean, like this team-based approach, right? What should ideally be a team-based approach really is an approach where for some physicians are at the top of the hierarchy, right? And we need to lateralize that hierarchy. This is, and I think a lot of physicians disagree with me about that. I even was approached about working with a physician, an advocacy organization that believed in like physician-led healthcare, and I was just like, I can't work with you. But the problem is that we're brainwashed in medical school, in media, everywhere to think that physicians should be at the top of the hierarchy when really we're all working together, and physicians just have a certain set of skills.
Yes.
Nurses have another set, social workers have another set, and our skills all complement each other, you know? And I think even, and I've had a lot of pushback regarding like physician assistants, because I'm a huge PA advocate, you know, and people have come at me about that, but I think we really need to change this healthcare culture that puts physicians at the top of the pyramid. That's my own.
No, we should all
opinion.
own that. I think that should be the truth across the board. And we got some folks that are agreeing. I'm going to go back to these comments because I haven't put it up. But John Kearney, who is an entering medical student, actually, congrats, was mentioned a discussion about the dangerous pedagogy comment made to me. But yeah, I mean, what I suggest is that we need to address this asymmetrical power dynamic, even just from providers to students.
Right.
The assumption that we can't learn from students is absurd to me, because students are coming with an immense amount of knowledge. And because I'm a critical race scholar, I take a critical pedagogy approach, which means that I'm just a facilitator of knowledge. I don't own the knowledge. My goal is to help the conversation in your mind to articulate it so you have a position and an understanding of it, right? It's a critical dialectical process, but that also means that you have an experience that I never had. And we can learn from that, right? If you're willing to share, that's an expertise. If we're talking about expertise at all, it's the expertise of people's lived experiences.
Right.
But I critique white folks often and white students who say, well, I believe this. And I stopped them in my class and I said, this isn't about how you believe something, right? Whether you believe racism exists or not is not the conversation here. I want you to talk about what your experience is. Because that's your domain of expertise, is your experience. And you learn it by being in communication with other folks, and you start to build and broaden that experience. But that takes time. It takes the willingness to get in uncomfortable situations and environments, which forcibly we have to do all the time. Right? Like we have to be the only one in the meeting. We have to be
all the time. Like literally for like 6 years, I was the only Black person at my faculty meeting of like 100 people, like in my department, and no one said anything.
Right.
Anything.
Well, yeah, and I think now at this moment we are in the crucible where like I thank my department. The chair said, we need to talk about what's happening. And we went through it, and Black folks and POC folks were sharing their experience. And it was about a half an hour. And, you know, per usual in a meeting, it was, okay, well, we're going to move on to the financials now. And
Oh my gosh.
what I appreciate is they heard me. And I was like, actually, I think we should just keep going.
Yeah.
And the chair responded and said, you're right. I'm sorry. And just left the floor open. Right. But that learning moment
I
means that
know.
from that point forward, they understand that it isn't just business, that there's people's humanity on the
Yes.
line now.
Well, that reminds me of like just my sister's been posting every day different tenets of white supremacy culture. But just this idea that we have this agenda, and it doesn't matter like what's on the agenda. We just need to hit each bullet, right? But no, because if there's something on the agenda that needs time and attention,
Right.
then we need to give it time and attention.
Yep. And there is something to your point. There is something about the United States, and I tell this in my talks a lot to white folks, and I think this is where they get the most uncomfortable, is I say the racialization of people in this country also means that your culture was taken from you as well, that you had to sell out the culture of wherever your folks came from to become white.
Right.
And in that process, it means that you aren't now assimilating into a new culture, you're assimilating into an apparatus of power.
Yes.
And that was the negotiation. And I say, and I actually feel bad now because I asked white colleagues, where are your family from? Right. And the response, well, at least when I was back in California, oh, they're from Palo Alto. And I'm like, no, they're not. Like, where are they from? Where are they from? And they're like, well, I don't know. I'm a mutt. And when I hear that, I'm like, doesn't that make you feel terrible? That there was this process of assimilation that stole you from an understanding of your culture to the point where you call yourself a mutt, and you can't reach back to get the traditions and the customs and the food and the ceremonies because it doesn't exist. And so now all we have are hot dogs, American flags, and fireworks. That's not culture. Right. We're used to, the practice of oratory history, where we don't need a book, right? We sit down and we share stories. That's community, that's relationship building. And I think part of the white apparatus of white supremacy is that no, culture has no space here. Right. And so if culture has no space here, that means humanity doesn't have space here. That means relationships don't have space here. And that's what's really disheartening at times when I'm in these spaces. We got some other folks. Oh, there's a question for you. Hi, Uché. I appreciate it.
I think I know who that is.
Oh, awesome. I'm always learning from you. Wondering, as a non-Black POC whose community has its own more historically recent histories of racism, both directed towards and being perpetrators of, how can we be allies/accomplices while recognizing our own histories and not taking up space/talking away credit, leadership from Black, Indigenous, Latinx folks who have been doing this work for many years? I struggle with this.
Well, the fact that you asked that question in that depth, you're like, miles ahead of most other people. I think that, like, similarly, just sort of like listening to experiences of Indigenous and Black POC, and understanding how social structures have influenced sort of the outcomes that we see today, including the health disparities, and really having a deeper knowledge of the history. And then when opportunities come up for people of color to be in leadership, then to maybe step aside to allow them these opportunities to lead. I think that what we're going to probably see is like a shift in power, right? That's ideally what we need. We need a shift in power, a shift in resources, and whatever that you can do to encourage and support that is work in a positive direction.
Yeah, I don't think I can add to that. I think you're right. I think actually, one thing I may add is, now, in my mind, now is the time that we need to start talking about reparations within the institutions of the United States. Reparations for damage and harm caused to Black folks that have never been made whole, or not even close to being made whole. And people struggle with the conversation of reparations, and they kind of freeze. Well, Edwin, how does that work? That's unfair.
Yeah,
You give
yeah. Everyone's so fixed on how would it work, and then especially the cash reparations part is something that
right.
I think white folks are very uncomfortable with as well. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're right. And my response is, well, let's be very clear. If you were to work for any company
Unpaid.
and not get paid, you would sue them for unpaid wages. And that can be calculated based on time spent working without being paid and how much you should make based on the average salary at the time. Well, that number adds up very quickly for all the unpaid labor that exists. And so when people say, but I'm not a slave owner and they're not slaves, so why are we giving them a reward? I've heard the term reward for being Black. And I said, there is nothing about reparations that is a reward.
No.
At all. Actually, what you're doing is you are being held accountable for the things that this country did. Whether
Right.
you're a slave owner or not, you are benefiting from the slavery that existed. And so we should all actually be jumping up and saying, you know what? I want to make sure this happens. I want to make sure we are contributing in enough ways so that there are reparations that exist. And it wouldn't be hard to calculate. It is in the trillions of dollars, but clearly trillions of dollars just can be printed up and the president can say, oh, we're going to have $1 trillion surplus or a budget for the coronavirus, right? Amazing. But I think 6 weeks before that, it was, I don't know where I can find money to even give people healthcare.
Right.
So the contradictions of this country are just so real. But
I know.
The more we talk about it, right, the more that I can declare, which I did on the AMA panel, that I'm an abolitionist, right? And approaching medicine in an abolitionist theoretical approach and saying, when slavery was occurring, abolitionists weren't saying, oh, we should make slavery nicer. We should, let's just change the way slavery looks. They're like, no, we need to abolish slavery. Fast forward 300 years, more than 300 years, and people say, well, Edwin, I don't know how that works with prisons and with policing. And I'm like,
I know how it works.
I know how it works. Communities already live without police. Go to the wealthiest neighborhoods in this country. The wealthiest. There are no police roaming around. Do they have security at the front? Yeah, sure. But police are not roaming around in their cars looking for crime to happen.
I know. And then also the other thing is that most police, they don't even, most of the cases that they address, they aren't even like criminal cases. They're like, get my cat from the tree. I mean, they don't really, so they're not needed in so many different ways. But I just wanted to mention on the subject of reparations, when I testified, as you know, in front of the select subcommittee on the coronavirus, which is chaired by Representative Clyburn, which was an interesting experience in itself. But I also wanted to make sure that in my testimony that I included that we needed reparations for Black communities, because, I think that, it's obvious we're at an inflection point now. It's obvious that so much of what we're seeing now is due to marginalization and disinvestment in Black communities, and that it's not just, even the disparities in health are not just about healthcare, right? I think everyone is clear on that it's housing, employment, education. And so we need funding and resources to go back into Black communities in the long term, like a long-term sustained commitment. And I'm actually working on a set of recommendations that the committee staffers asked me to submit. And I'm going to be actually sending them off to Aletha Maybank at the AMA so they can add some in as well. But I have a section dedicated to reparations.
Love it.
And because I felt like this needs to be discussed. And it's just so interesting because I feel like culture is shifting, and I think that reparations is no longer like a revolutionary or radical term. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
I'm glad to see that, but I really hope that we see some change regarding reparations in the next few years. I really do. If the moment's not now, when is the moment? Like, when is a good moment?
Yeah, Angela Davis a couple weeks ago in Oakland stood in front of a group of protesters and said, we are in the middle of the largest civil rights movement in the history of the world. Yeah. That puts it in context. Like you said, if it's not now.
When?
Right. then actually this country has proven, if this country doesn't move in the way that it needs to bring the humanity that was taken from Black folks, then I actually don't think this country ever will.
I know. I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
So there is a couple questions. We had someone say, in terms of health disparities, what steps are most critical to take in our departments plus schools? What thoughts do you have on that?
That's a great. Oh, hi, Jordana. So that's a great question, and I think that especially for most clinicians, the way that we've been educated and trained to think about disparities, it's on an interpersonal and individual level, which is why I love this idea. Of understanding structural competence and teaching that in medical schools and in residency, and this understanding that there's social structure, like social and economic policies. There are the type of economic system that we live in, capitalist system, and structural racism, how they all influence the social determinants of health more downstream, and those influence health disparities. And so I think that when clinicians and have a better understanding of how the health disparities happen, we can actually do the work that needs to be done, right? And that is engaging with the communities, centering the communities that are affected, working with community-based organizations that are already doing the work on the ground. And whether it's like a housing advocacy group or a job support group, there are many ways that we can get from outside of the four walls of these institutions out into the communities and do the work that's going to help close the disparities gap that we're seeing.
Yeah, there's not much to add to that. I think the nuance that I will touch on is I'm going to ask folks to take the language of health disparities out of their vocabulary.
Inequity.
Yeah, because disparities, and disparities just mean that there's a difference in numbers. Oh, one is higher than the other, but it doesn't speak to the power dynamic that exists in the relationship to those numbers. And so we have to, language is very important. I think being a lawyer has helped guide me in that. And so for I hope I can call you Jojo, but that's your handle on Twitter. So Jojo, to say, like, moving forward, a big part is let's move away, because health disparities is it is grants that fund the research to look at the differences among racial groups. Nice, not necessarily helpful, because the grant isn't giving money to actually address the inequity that exists.
Right.
I have never seen a grant that says, we'd like you to research racism, and we'd like you to dismantle or provide ways that we can dismantle racism. Mostly because I don't know if there is a vested interest in actually doing that.
Mm-hmm. That too. And the other thing is, there's this, I go over definitions in my talks and trainings a lot. So I tell people, like, what health disparities are. An example is that male babies are usually way more than female babies. Like that's a disparity, but that's based on genetics, right? But a health inequity is the Black maternal mortality rate that we're seeing, that Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in around pregnancy compared to white women. That's because of human-made disadvantages, social, economic, environmental disadvantages, and I think that helps people to understand it a little bit more. But I think that I'm so glad that you brought that up. But we are using those two terms interchangeably, and they are not interchangeable. And thank you for mentioning that words do matter.
Yeah, no, and I knew you knew that, and I wanted to share with the folks listening. Yes. One step that I would say we can move towards is, because I see this process, right? I talked about this with Dr. Landry at Boston, where we say it goes from health disparities to health inequities, but I think the next conversation we need to have is health injustices. And what I mean by that is that injustices mean that inequities, we see the thing is a problem. For me, the injustice is that y'all have seen it now and you're doing nothing about it.
Right.
Now we need to address that, because there's something that is ingrained in medicine when you can present that Black men are dying at higher rates of colorectal cancer because their screenings are happening later, or they're not getting them at all. And the response is, well, that's not my job. I put it on the exam list, but they didn't do it.
Right.
So
Oh,
so that's your job. Like, how about we just
yeah.
decrease the inequity there, and we could actually save lives. So it takes time. Language is also culture, right? And I think
Yeah.
medicine has done a good job at siloing off like what makes itself feel comfortable. And
Yeah.
it's when we do things like this that we force it to move.
Yeah, like one thing like my sister says is, for example, how, social structures can place certain communities at risk, right? Like just even saying that, right? Because our Surgeon General likes to blame individuals for their own health outcomes when we know that really it's largely socioeconomic factors like poverty, inequality, housing that lead to the health inequities that we see. So yeah, so just being mindful of how we're speaking about these issues is important.
Yeah, and I think that kind of touches on what was asked in this question by Peds O to Doc in medical education, educating physicians and training. How do we move past equity to liberation?
Mm.
And I love the concept, and I love the approach. You can start, and I have
No,
some thoughts, but it's we got to work through it.
yeah, no, I'd love to hear what you have to say. I mean, I think that that should be our goal, right? I think we use equity a lot, but really it should be health liberation,
Yeah.
and that's the goal that we should always be keeping in mind. But that's the goal where all of these structural barriers have been removed. So we have to work on removing those barriers first, right, to
Right.
get to liberation.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it starts with, and maybe I'm biased because I sit myself in critical race theory, but I think it starts by a critical interrogation of the apparatuses. Because if we don't get into the basement to understand how the foundation worked, then we're
Right.
never actually getting to the liberation, right?
Right.
The example I usually give in my talks is if you have a building that you want to implode and you get a civil engineer and you say, I want you to take this building down, where would they start? Well, they wouldn't go to the roof, and the roof is 2020, right? They wouldn't say, oh, put the explosives on the corners of the
Right.
roof. You'll just end up with a decrepit building with no roof. They go into the basement where the spider
Right.
webs are and where it's infested with rodents, and you have to wrestle and get in there and get your knees dirty, and you say, I got to find the weakest point
Mm,
of this edifice,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
then we deconstruct it.
Yeah.
But that's a lot of
That's a
work.
lot of
That's a lot of work.
work.
And it's everywhere. And I think this is, one thing that I hope to do with a lot of my colleagues who I've been working the space with Dr. Carey, with Jenny Tsai, with folks at UCSF and Juliana and Dr. Richmond Stevens. We're creating kind of a theoretical framework in academic medicine where we are calling it MedCrit, or critical race theory in medicine, so that scholars and thinkers can say, using my MedCrit lens, this is how I deconstruct this issue. And it's going to take some time because medicine doesn't like things that isn't biomedical. But I think we can.
And also takes a long time to change culture within medicine as well.
Right. And I'll announce it now, and hopefully you'll join us. But I'm planning on creating a convening to start that conversation of MedCrit and saying, because it can happen in so many spaces, right? It can be in consulting, it can be in peds, it can be in surgery, it can be in family medicine. Like, how do you apply the lens into those spaces to start deconstructing?
Count me in.
Awesome. All right. Dope.
Absolutely.
I love it. So we have, let me know when you got to, you can tell now that this is just it's a conversation. It's all love.
Oh my God, it's already after 2. Okay. Maybe by 2:15.
2:15 works. So we'll quickly just, I don't want people to feel like you got claps. People love what you're saying. Let's see what other conversations. We'll see if we can bring them together. So recommendations on dialogue for medical students. You got a big thank you. Oh, I got a thank you. Andy Nguyen, who's a 4th-year medical student, can you speak to the pitfalls of implicit bias trainings and how to avoid those in anti-racist trainings?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. And you know what? I'm going to be totally honest about this. I think that, obviously unconscious bias, that term is sort of, this watered down, more palatable term that, predominantly white institutions, like to use. But I think that what I do when I talk about unconscious bias, I frame it around structural racism. And I actually just tell people, I said, we live in such a racist society that folks have actually started internalizing stereotypes and assumptions about Black people. And, it's just as dangerous and harmful as explicit bias is. Like, I don't sugarcoat it at all. And I say, because we know that it's implicated in, a lot of the health disparities that we have been seeing, and that we need to obviously address, structural racism, but then we also need to be talking about this, this bias that's occurring unconsciously, but that is just as harmful.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Thank you for that question, Andy. I think someone was responding to our conversation about health disparity versus health equity, and that they just changed their slides as a result. So we're already changing things. This is great.
Yay.
I also love this motto of communicate, right? The video, the audio, communicating with the audience via questions. I think it just makes it for folks.
I feel like we're all in one room together.
Right. Without getting Zoom bombed.
Oh my, yeah.
I know. And we have folks, I read this already, but mentioning a student at UW, Naomi, who's an amazing student, pushing a lot of the efforts happening at UW, dismantling some of the structures that maintain differences in approach. So the EGFR, what are the most effective strategies you have both found to convince decision makers in clinical labs, leadership of professional societies, et cetera, that exposure to racism is a health risk, not biological race?
Actually, Edwin, I'm curious because Naomi is at UW, right?
UW,
yeah.
Yep.
So what, what do you think, or how were you all successful in getting the work done there in terms of communicating with leadership and getting buy-in?
Yeah, and it was multifactorial. It was conversations that were happening at the same time, students pushing, Naomi, other students pushing and saying, this is a problem in our curricular setting. Other folks in the clinics asking questions of why are we still using this? Right. And so you had like pressures coming from different angles, which then led to few of the heads of nephrology coming to speak with the students, because the students demanded, we need some clarity on why this is happening. Right. And so now you have clinical brought into the education setting. Amazing. And it was a reckoning with like, yeah, maybe we need to explore this. And so students, again, pushing that conversation, and then having folks on faculty that can keep the conversation at the center. Right. And saying, let's not forget like what we're trying to do here, what it takes. And then having the lens, because what was beautiful is in these meetings, the faculty would say, yeah, and we're hearing from the students these concerns. We're hearing from colleagues these concerns. And we're not exactly sure what to do, but I got to give huge credit to UW. It wasn't a long conversation. Once folks got into the room, once the decision makers were in the room, when you're talking about racialized medicine, it's not really that difficult to get to the point of saying, yeah, this is problematic. Right. And we use a very basic equation. At least when I was in the room speaking to the lab scientists, we said, well, if we may, let us walk us through this process. And it starts with, can we all agree that race is a social political construct? Yes. Okay, great. Can we also agree that it is not a biological or genetic construct, because geneticists have told us that it is not a genetic marker. There is no genome for race. Right. Yes. Therefore, if those two premises are true, why are we using it for diagnostic tools? If that's the beginning of the conversation, right, it's a very different conversation of, oh, well, you need to persuade me that this is a problem. And so huge ups and support to UW, to the students who pushed it, to the questions around why this is existing. And it happens all over the place. Right. In spaces that we're not even aware of. Right. And I'm glad more and more is coming out. I'm part of this group called the Institute for Healing and Justice with Bernadette Lim and a few medical students at UCSF. And this is really the key focus. So to the question, I think it's like organizing. You have to organize folks, right? You have to have the conversations. You have to sit down. You have to coalition build. You have to have the information. You have to have, here are the requests on how we move forward. And when they do that, it folks are hard pressed to not agree.
Right. Yeah, I'm thinking about even at Mount Sinai School of Medicine here in New York City. I think they had a similar experience with AOA. I believe that Mount Sinai has gotten rid of AOA, at least for like the clinical rotations, because we know that it's a huge predictor of, you know, what residency programs students get into. And they did a write-up, I think it was in Academic Medicine, about the whole process. And it was interesting because it sounded like a lot like coalition building, about getting students together, getting faculty together, and really just making it very obvious, like these are the issues, right? And it's really common sense. Like this, you know, this system is not benefiting, you know, our disadvantaged students.
Right, for sure. I can't imagine a better conversation. This hour has been unbelievable.
I know. This
I really
great.
appreciate it. Like I could talk to you for hours, and I feel like we would have a lot to talk about in hours. So we may have to put a bookmark, and we'll continue the chapters.
And do part 2 another time.
Yeah, part 2 another time. Maybe we bring other folks in, bring Ria, you know, have a party on here.
Oh my goodness, we'd love to have her.
I mean, I think both of you testified to Congress.
Yeah, she testified a few days ago to, I think, the Energy and Commerce Committee.
Wow.
Yeah.
So for folks watching, I mean, you're talking with someone who is literally affecting policy on the national level, and the importance for a lot of folks is, I want to encourage people as an organizer, like, our communities depend on like who we are in relation with, but always holding the constant reminder that our community is actually much bigger, that the fight that we're trying to get to are for the folks that don't have the privilege to be in the halls of an academic institution, that the fight we have, it's much bigger than how I feel today and what it needs to take to get to that liberation. But it's hard because sometimes the immediacy of the microaggressions and the racism sits on you, and you're like, well, then this is my fight. And it is. And it's a part of, in my mind, the larger struggle that we have. Yes.
And can I also say, if there are any you know, students and trainees out there that, you know, as a physician or whatever other training you have, that you can affect change in your own way, you have to just, you know, I mentioned earlier, walking in your purpose, you'll meet your destiny. And so if this work is important to you, you will get it done, and you will find a way to get it done. And so it may not take that traditional path that you expected it to. You may veer off and go down another path, and it may not look like how you expected it to look. But you will you'll meet your destiny and do the work that is incredibly important in service of our communities.
Yeah, and I'll pull from, because this, like we mentioned in the beginning, this work is hard, especially for students in positions of just trying to learn, right? I feel for the reality that it's like, I just want our students to be able to come to school and just learn medicine, right? And not feel like they have the obligation to teach faculty or change curriculum. And we're not there yet, unfortunately.
No.
But speaking that truth, I do believe that history will absolve you. Even when it's difficult in the moment, history will absolve you, and you can look back and say, I'm so glad that I spoke up.
Yes, well, always speak up.
Yep. We got your back.
Yes, absolutely.
Dr. Blackstock, thank you so much. This was so good.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone else that was out there listening and posting comments. And this is wonderful.
Yeah, well, you're getting love. Folks are saying you're inspirational. Big clap.
I think we both are. This is for both of us.
Well, hopefully our kiddos can meet sometime.
I know.
If you're ever out in Seattle, you are welcome to come hang out. You have a home.
I will absolutely connect,
please
with
do.
you.
Please do.
Absolutely. Thank you for this opportunity.
Yep. We'll see you, and I will now end the broadcast. Everyone, good to see you. Welcome to the Praxis. You can catch it on Twitter. Go to your live streams for your podcast, and hope to talk to you all soon. All right, bye.
Bye.